What is the lifespan of your pet snake? Whether you are a brand new person to the reptile trade and you're looking for information before you buy your first snake, or you are a seasoned keeper, I want you to stick around and watch the rest of this video because I think this discussion poses some pretty interesting questions. If you are interested in reptile content that focuses on higher quality of care, conservation, and science, then subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the weekly content. Welcome to another short video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dylan. I am the host of the Animals at Home podcast. Thank you very much for dropping by today. So this is a topic that I have discussed briefly on a few episodes of the podcast previously, but I think it does warrant its own little segment. So that's why I'm making this video now. If you are an advanced keeper, I want to know what you think about this because this does kind of pose some ethical questions with the reptile trade that I think we can get around, but it's worth discussing. So I'm going to start by giving you the really fast and quick answer. Your pet snake will have a lifespan of somewhere between 12 and 20 years. Now, if you are someone that's been keeping reptiles for a while, you're probably laughing at that answer because it's kind of ridiculous and a little bit too broad. But if you're brand new and you're actually just looking for information before buying your first snake, that's a really good range to start with. That range allows you to look at the commitment that you're getting into when you buy a snake and understanding that if you do pick up a snake, it's going to be with you for at least a decade, more likely closer to 2 decades. So if you are still here and that 12 to 20 year range didn't freak you out too much, that must mean that you're somewhat serious about getting a new snake. So that is great. Now we can take a look at a few of the common species within the trade and see how long these animals are actually living. Ball pythons. Obviously, ball pythons are one of the more common snakes in the reptile trade. These animals are going to live anywhere from 25 to 30 years. There are even some stories of them getting to the late 30s and early 40s in captivity. Corn snakes or any other similar colubrid like a king snake are going to be between 15 and 20. Boas, most boa species, rainbow boas, boa imperator, boa constrictors, these animals are going to live anywhere between 20 and 30 years. Same with carpet pythons, around 20, 25 years. Reticulated pythons, again, these are going to be a 30-year animal. Anacondas, I don't know how many people out there are keeping anacondas, but I've seen 30 years, 40 years. I even heard an advanced keeper who has kept several anacondas say that he has a 50-plus-year-old anaconda. I don't know if that's true, but that's what he said. Garter snakes are one species I can think of that tend to live a little bit shorter, between 8 and 10 years, but even then 10 years is kind of where that average is going to sit. So one thing you'll notice with snake lifespans is that they do really seem like ballparks. They're kind of rough ranges from 20 to 30 years for the most part, and in my opinion most of these are going to be on the low side. As the reptile trade improves, as we as an industry improve our care levels, whether that's lighting, substrate, more space, climate control, climate cycling, there's a bunch of different ways that we are getting better at caring for these animals. As we do that, the animals are living longer in captivity. We have removed predators, we've removed starvation, we've removed parasites, we've removed all the different reasons that a reptile might die in the wild, and now we can just sort of exploit the fact that these animals have a very high lifespan potential. Snakes have a very slow metabolism, just like all reptiles, and because of that, they can live a very long time. In the wild, it doesn't happen. In captivity, it can. And that's why I say use that 12-year minimum as the starting point for how long your snake's gonna live. So when you go into the pet store or the expo and you're gonna buy your animal, you need to understand that when you buy it, it's now your responsibility for the rest of its life. And that's gonna be at least 12 years, if not much longer. So this brings me to one of my moral dilemmas with the reptile trade, and I'd really love to know what you think about this. A huge portion of the animals in the captive reptile trade live for a very long time. Most of them are going to be 10 plus years, many of them 15 plus, a lot of them 20 plus years. My crested gecko is 15 years old. I've seen many crested geckos 20 plus years old. If you walk into the reptile section of a pet store, king snakes, ball pythons, bearded dragons, leopard geckos, crested geckos, those are all 15 plus, if not 20 plus year animals, which is a big difference from when you walk down the hallway and go to the hamsters or the rats, you're going to see 2 or 3 year lifespans. There's a really big difference. So I always wonder, those small animals that are being bought at the reptile store, where do they end up 20 years later? Nobody can plan for 20, 25, 30 years. That's just too much time to realistically plan for the future. So for example, if I go to an expo and I want to buy a boa constrictor and I go up to the table and I buy the yearling animals born this year, there is no way I can honestly say that for the next 30 years I'm going to care for this animal. Because unless you're the Queen of England, you're not going to have any idea what your next 30 years are going to look like. And there are even some animals in the reptile trade that live much longer, like tortoises. You're talking 50, 60, 70, even 100 years in some cases. So we have this we have this amazing hobby with these animals that live super, super long for the most part. And I'm calling 10 to 20 years super long because the other pets in the pet industry live, 2-3 years is really common. So what does this mean? Does this mean that we shouldn't own reptiles? We shouldn't own snakes because they just live too long? No, I don't think so at all. But I do think it's something that needs to be discussed, and we need to be able to put a plan in place to make sure animals are being sold and purchased ethically. So here's what I think you should do. If you are in the market for a new animal and you want to buy a brand new snake, and you see that the snake's going to live between 15, 20, 30 years, something like that, you should look at your life and ask yourself, do I honestly think for the next 5 years I'll be able to care for this animal? Is there anything that I can foresee that's going to change in the next 5 years that will make it impossible for me to care for this animal? Am I in grade 10 and I want to go to university and leave my home in 2 years from now? If that's the case, I don't think you should get an animal. Are you going to be moving at some point? Do you have a job that's changing or something like that? There are a bunch of different things that may change within 5 years that allow you to see it much more clear. Again, you can't see out 30 years, but you could probably see out 5 years. And that way every 5 years you can kind of reanalyze and see if you can continue caring for the animal. The goal is to keep the animal its whole life, but again, it's just not realistic to be able to say I'm going to have it for 25 years. And the second thing I think you can do to help you ethically own animals that have such a long lifespan is you need to have a number in your phone or an email address of somebody in your community where you could drive to their house tomorrow and drop off your animal and know that it's going to be cared for responsibly, safely, and ethically. As we all know, life can change at the drop of a hat and you cannot predict it. So you need to have some sort of contingency plan in place for your animal. That way, if something changes, you can move the animal along and you don't have to worry about it. Again, ideally the animal stays with you for the length of its entire lifespan, but it's just not realistic to say I'm gonna have this snake for 30 years from the time I got it. You cannot predict that far in the future. So you should have these plans in place. Can you keep it for the next 5 years? And is there a place you can drop it off tomorrow if you had to? I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this because it's something that I think about all the time. I see a 10-year-old, for example, get his first ball python at an expo. If you fast forward to when he's 30, is he still going to have that snake? Do people maintain their relationship with their animals for that long? I really hope they do. That's my plan, and I really hope that's your plan as well. And I hope with this sort of two-part system that I'm laying out in this video, it can help us all contribute to that, keeping our animals and making sure they have a safe place to go if something changes. If you have not listened to episode number 51 of the Animals at Home podcast with Dr. Sergio Balaguer-Renia, I highly recommend you check it out. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the show Extinct or Live on Animal Planet with Forrest Gallant, but in December 2019, they did a show where Forrest rediscovered an extinct species of caiman, which was basically a total lie. Sergio is the biologist who actually rediscovered the species and wrote the scientific paper, and Animal Planet and Forrest sort of overshadowed it and sort of stole some credit that was not theirs. And so we talk about that. Of course, we discussed the really amazing attributes of this really interesting caiman, sort of yellow greenish skin, very long elongated snout. Very highly interesting. I really encourage you to go check it out. And if you'd like to give me a follow on Instagram at animalsathomeca, I usually make a post when I publish a new podcast or video. And I do also answer all my DMs on there if you have any questions or just want to say hi. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell if you don't want to miss the weekly posts. I will catch you guys in the next video.